Hey guys, Chris here from Carolot Farm. Thank you for joining me. It is now approaching the end of September. We're doing things a little differently for some of the horses, and I can't wait to show you and tell you all about it.
But first, everybody is very patiently waiting for their breakfast. Each morning when I start feeding, the first thing I do is I put Lady in her stall. She gets quite a bit more feed than the boys, so I do want to separate her out. In one of my buckets here, I have a half a cup of moistened Triple Crown Senior. Rocky used to get this whole half a cup all to himself, but now I'm splitting this half a cup between Rocky, who gets a handful, Shenanigans, who gets a handful, and then Snuggles is left with, again, not much more than a handful. So this is a little change to our feeding routine, and I'm gonna now put these two little feed tubs in the stall because you can see Rocky and Shenanigans are very much wanting their breakfast. I know, boys, it's coming. The boys are now eating a handful of their breakfast in the stall here. They each have a short rubber tub, which is working well for them. So now that the boys are eating in the stall, I'm gonna let Sweetheart, who's very ready here, and Snuggles into the feedlots behind me because that's where they have their breakfast. Sweetheart here is still getting her small half a cup of senior feed, but we have started feeding her hay pellets, and I'm actually starting her with the teff pellets, and that's what she will be eating on for a good while here. After everyone has had their grain, some of them take very little time to eat it, the boys and Snuggles that is, then it's time to give everyone hay. Ever since I decided to split my herd once again, it was primarily with Sweetheart in mind because I wanted to really work on trying to limit her asthma triggers, and it just seemed like the hay once again could be a culprit. So the boys are with Lady and they do get hay, and then Snuggles does not get hay out in the field, but she comes into the feedlot twice a day and she has an hour, hour and a half to eat on a flake, and she does a pretty good job of that. Another little preparation that we have done for the winter ahead here on the farm is we went ahead and we picked up 50 bales of, I believe it was a second cutting fescue mixed grass hay. It's fairly tender and the horses seem to really be enjoying it. And it was really all that we could take on to fill our hay barn. Our hay barn is fairly small, and I think at its maximum capacity, it maybe holds about 75 bales. So it's pretty full with the new 50, and we still had 25, give or take, of our older hay, which is not in the best of shape, but it will be our emergency reserve hay if we should need to get to it. There's a chance we'll need to get more. However, we also have a good family friend who has some rounds that we're going to get. I'm not going to put a round in the field because I am very reluctant to have my horses with their heads stuffed in a round, just especially with Sweetheart and her asthma issues. But we could always unpeel from the round and have that as additional hay. So we have our 50 new squares, and then we'll probably get 4 or more of the rounds, and we'll see how that goes this winter. I've been really happy with our most recent batch of hay. We picked this up about a week and a half ago, and the horses seem to be eating it really well. It's relatively tender. It has a little bit of foxtail in it, which is not ideal, but it seems to be a fairly minimal amount. When I shake it out, I do try to go through the piles, and if I see some big obvious pieces like that, I see another one over here, I go ahead and I remove these because they can cause some issues for your horses. They can get compacted up around their gum line, and they can even cause like internal issues with the lining of their intestines. So if you see foxtail, go ahead and pull it out of your hay. This hay has a little bit, not too much, but it does unfortunately have a little bit of foxtail in it. I'm not sure how familiar you are with foxtail, but it's a grass that we see growing around the perimeter of our garden or, fields and such. It's very common, but it really is not an ideal grass to have in your horse's hay because it can cause some issues. But a lot of times hay fields will have small sections of them that have some foxtail, and so again, just be mindful of that if you're looking at your hay. If you're looking to kind of try it out, if you see a lot of foxtail, you might want to kind of steer clear. What I have is just a little bit in mine, and so I am able to kind of pick it out. But it's just something to really be mindful of because it's a very common thing that we find in our hay. Snuggles is very much enjoying her morning hay here. She is in very good weight, so this little bit of supplemental hay twice a day seems to be doing just the thing for her. Sweetheart may have compacted her hay pellets over there, so let me go check on that. As I suspected, when you are feeding your horse hay pellets or, moistened hay cubes, they tend to get compacted at the bottom of the feed tub. And so when I see that Sweetheart is having some difficulty, I just come in and loosen it up. It's okay, sweet girl. But I do think that the soaked hay pellets seem to be working well for her. But again, we're just doing this for a month trial, and then we'll see what we think at the end. I believe I mentioned in an earlier video around probably the first of the month that we did want to switch Sweetheart off of the loose hay onto the hay pellets with her breathing issues. And that was because we're still trying to cut out as many of the triggers as possible. And although she had been off of the hay and then was put back on it and seemed to do well, she was then having another flare-up a few weeks ago, which is when I sort of decided that I just wanted to do like a month trial of no hay, just the soaked hay pellets, to see if that gives her more continuous relief. And I think she's doing better, but it's still a little too soon to say for sure. Because Snuggles had been a really good companion for Sweetheart earlier in the summer when we had to separate them initially to kind of get her off the hay, I figured I would just go ahead and put these two girls back together for this next sort of month trial. They seem to get along pretty well. They've got a lot of personality, both of them, and they seem to be pretty good companions. The boys are also enjoying their morning hay. They do a really good job cleaning it up. I think they're very much enjoying our new hay, which is a wonderful thing. When I hear that Lady has knocked over her bucket to finish the last few little morsels on the ground, that usually tells me that she's just about done. I really like to feed with these rubber tubs, especially with my younger minis. They're almost indestructible. The horses can kick them and step on them and just knock them around and they're not going to get hurt. Whereas the buckets do tend to get brittle over time. I also don't like the horses to be like stepping in or around the buckets. We did see Snuggles, right? She had her loose bucket in with her, but my concern is that, they could get a leg caught in the bucket handle. And anyways, long story short, I'm a big fan of these and I probably should get a few more because they're just really handy to have. Sweetheart was just having a coughing fit, which reminded me that I should mention, although we're still working to limit as many triggers as possible, the next thing I might try after these soaked hay pellets would be like a cough-free type of supplement. I've seen a couple that I'm interested in trying, so that might be the next thing on my list to give a go. Here you can see her nostrils are just ever so slightly flaring. For Sweetheart, this is probably about as good as it gets right now with what we've been doing and what we've been observing from her. Her sides are ever so slightly flared as well, kind of heaving just a little, but nothing too strong, which is a very good sign. The field behind me is our lower field, and it sits just beyond the garden. This is where Snuggles and Sweetheart were turned out. I think it was back in August for a good time while we were resting the neighboring back field. And this field was grazed down really, really short. And so for the last several weeks, we've had it closed off and it's just been resting and recovering, and it's doing well. You can see it is starting to green up. We got a little bit of rain last week. We've got, it looks like maybe a week of potential rain off and on coming up, which is wonderful for the grass. But another thing the grass needs is sunlight. And you can see we've had a lot of leaves starting to fall. And just yesterday, I took the leaf blower to this field and I blew all of those leaves down to the woods because I wanted to uncover as much of the grass as possible so that it could reach, receive the sunlight and then hopefully continue to grow. With another month or so of good warm temperatures and enough rain off and on, we have a lot of potential in the growth of this grass. So if you're like us and you are working with small acreage, you might consider that. If you have a bunch of leaves that are already falling and your grass is still trying to grow, try to get those leaves off to give your grass as much of a chance as possible. I did not use the leaf blower up here under this one tulip poplar, and you can see just how thick these leaves are. And this is what the leaves were like, on really the rest of the field, especially on that bottom half. And so although I did blow the leaves off yesterday, more are falling, and so it'll be a continuous work in progress, but every little bit helps. Behind me here is the field that we had sectioned off back in, what was that, the middle of July to the middle of August maybe. We were doing some weed control. We sprayed our 2,4-D on this back field. It killed some stuff. It didn't kill a ton of stuff, so it kind of makes me wonder just what was the effectiveness, because I was expecting a lot more brown. However, now that we've sprayed it and we've rested it, I'm going to keep a really watchful eye for that white vervain that was tending to be over here on the far side of the field, closest to our run-in shelter. So I want to keep my eyes peeled to make sure that that doesn't come back. And we might have to spray this field once again in the springtime, but it was a first step. Another little preparation that we have done for the winter ahead here on the farm is we went ahead and we picked up 50 bales of, I believe it was a second cutting fescue mixed grass hay. It's fairly tender and the horses seem to really be enjoying it. And it was really all that we could take on to fill our hay barn. Our hay barn is fairly small, and I think at its maximum capacity, it maybe holds about 75 bales. So it's pretty full with the new 50, and we still had 25, give or take, of our older hay, which is not in the best of shape, but it will be our emergency reserve hay if we should need to get to it. There's a chance we'll need to get more. However, we also have a good family friend who has some rounds that we're going to get. I'm not going to put a round in the field because I am very reluctant to have my horses with their heads stuffed in a round, just especially with Sweetheart and her asthma issues. But we could always unpeel from the round and have that as additional hay. So we have our 50 new squares, and then we'll probably get 4 or more of the rounds, and we'll see how that goes this winter. When we picked our hay up, maybe 2 weekends ago, I was chatting with our hay dealer, and I was surprised to hear him say that as of the 1st of September, they had already cut and put up their third cutting. I feel like normally you're still getting a third cutting a little farther into the fall. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just totally off with my timing. But I think part of that could have been because we had a lot of rain in the first half of the summer, and although it was hot, it was wet. And so I suspect that the grasses were growing at a faster rate. I know things were here green on the farm well into July. So I think from a hay perspective, the temperature and the moisture was just right. And so now that things dried up at the very end of the summer, fortunately, it seems as though our hay farmers have already put their hay up, which is good. As Lady eats her hay here, I am noticing that she's beginning to drop some little wet hay wads or hay balls, some people call them, which tells me that her teeth are just not as efficient. And I'm not too surprised. The rescue said that yes, her teeth were checked and they were in good repair. However, I think she's close to 30 years old. And so most horses, as people, as we get older, our teeth aren't quite as good or strong as they once were. Sometimes we start to even lose teeth. Horses are the same. And so although she had a good report, given her age, she might benefit from some soaked hay pellets just like Sweetheart, for a different reason, of course. But I could certainly start supplementing her feed with additional hay pellets. And that way I can rest assured that she is getting enough nutrients from this little bit of hay that she's nibbling on, because she's getting the supplemental hay with her soaked hay pellets. So I think as we head closer to winter, that's something that we'll want to do for Our Lady here. Here is one of those hay wads I was telling you about. It's just wet, chewed hay. You can see it has been chewed some, but then it sort of falls out of her mouth. So it's not uncommon for these older horses to have some of these issues, but it's something to be mindful of. One of the very last things that I still do every morning is pick the barnyard, the paddocks, the run-ins, And, you know, as I do so, I'm always still inspecting the field, the fences. But what makes me really, really happy is just to know that my horses' needs are being met. They're all very content these days. Everyone's weight looks really good. And I think we have found something that seems to be working reasonably well for Sweetheart. So I'll keep you posted. You know, every day is similar but different here on the farm. I hope you've enjoyed this little late September update, and check back soon because we're always up to something. Bye, guys.
I couldn't help but share these last few pictures. We have a very affectionate group of minis here on the farm. They're all so sweet and they love attention. And so this morning when they came over to say hi, I just couldn't help myself. I had to take a picture. Hope you enjoy.